Okay guys, this is our last video that actually describes what group statements are all about. From here on further, then we're going to proceed to consolidations itself. So just to recap a little bit, in the second video, we actually looked at the whole aspect of control. And we said that an investor controls an investee and if and only if the investor has all of the following. Number one, power over the investee, and we actually discussed what does power means. We had the definition of power, we had certain examples of power, we said what is needed for power, and we refer to IFRS as well as to the Company Act. So make sure that you understand that. In this one, we are going to look a little bit more to exposure or rights to variable returns from the involvement in the investee. So I am involved in the day-to-day operations of this company that I've invested in. And that involvement will eventually lead to the fact that I'm going to earn some returns. It's a variable return, it can't be a fixed return, a variable return. So I will have the right to earn some variable returns as a result of my investment. And over and above that, I can use my power over the investee to affect the amount of such a return. So number one, I have the right to a variable return as a result of being involved in the investee. And the second thing is I also exercise an ability to determine what is going to be the amount of this return that I'm going to earn. Now, what is a return? What kind of return? Exposure rights to variable returns. Now, think about that. It's logic. I've got shares in a company. What is the first thing that I'm going to receive because I'm a shareholder? Dividends. I can also receive interest if I am the holder of a compulsory redeemable preference share. We have seen that I am entitled on interest. I could be entitled in some kind of remuneration as a result of my involvement in the subsidiary company or the investee company. So any type of money that I am entitled on as a result of my involvement with the investee, that is classified as a return. And once I have actually a right to variables returns and I can exercise any power over the amount of that return, that means that I'm actually in control of that investee. And if I'm in control of an investee, it means that that is a subsidiary of mine. And because it's a subsidiary of mine, I have to do consolidated statements. Now, let's look at further definitions according to IFRS. IFRS says a group of companies means that there must be somewhere a parent company or holding company and subsidiaries, one subsidiary or more than one subsidiary. If it's a very simple group, it's only the parent company and the subsidiary company. If it's a more complex group, it's going to be a parent company and more than one subsidiary, like Naspers, for instance. That's a very complex group. Now, what is a subsidiary? A subsidiary is an entity which is controlled by a parent company. Right. So the one is the mother, the other one is the child. The mother is the parent company or the holding company. The child is a subsidiary company. Now, we also saw that IFRS spoke about business combinations. And in a business combination is a transaction or other event where the acquirer obtains control of one or more businesses. So that means as soon as I have this share investment in a company, I'm going to get control over that company. Now, a simple group looks like this. We said there's a parent company and there's a subsidiary company. And the parent company controls the subsidiary company. We have also established that control doesn't mean that it necessarily has the majority shareholding in S1, but it can control S1's decision making in various ways, and therefore S1 is going to be a subsidiary. Let's say P Limited owns 51% of S Limited share. Each share has one vote at the AGM. and S Limited has no other classes of issued shares. So there's only this is ordinary shares. So that means that P has 50% of the voting power at the AGM where the decisions are being either ratified or made. So that means that P effectively controls S. And P is the parent company, S is then the subsidiary company. Now, Vertical Group says P holds 51% of the shares of S Limited. S Limited holds 51% of the shares of SS Limited. Each share entitles the holder of the share to one general vote on the AGM. S Limited and SS Limited have no other classes of issued shares. Now, who is now who in this whole thing? P is the parent company of S. S is the parent company of SS. But because P is the parent company of S, P is now the ultimate holding company or parent company. S1 as well as SS will become subsidiaries of P. Now, how come P can exercise control over the decisions that S1 is going to make? And they will actually prescribe to S1 what decisions S1 must make, what SS is concerned, because they control the decisions made by SS. So indirectly, P controls S1, and by that control, you also by implication will control SS. Therefore, P, S1 and SS all form part of the same group of companies, where S1 and SS are subsidiary companies, and P is the parent company. Now let's have a look at this one. P owns 48% of the shares of S Limited. Each share entitles the holder of one vote on the AGM. S Limited has no other classes of issued shares. The remaining voting rights, so the 52%, are held by 1,000 shareholders. None of them are holding more than 1% shareholding in S. So what does that effectively mean? It says when there's AGM and we have to vote on decisions, P can 48% have an impact on the decision making. So he's going to exercise 48% of the votes. No other shareholder can exercise more than 1% of the votes. So clearly, P is the guy who's going to make up the mind what is going to happen with those decisions that S needs to take. So clearly, P controls S. It doesn't have a majority shares, but it controls the decision-making process which happens in S. And therefore, it has power over S, and therefore S is a subsidiary company of P. Let's have a look at this one. P Limited owns 40% of the shares of S. Each share entitles the holder to one vote at the AGM. S Limited has no other classes of issued shares. AGM is annual general meeting of the shareholders. The remaining voting rights are held by Mr. A, who has 35% shares, and Mrs. B, who has 25% of the shares of S. So P has more than A. P has 40%. Mr. A has 35%, Mrs. B has 25%. The question is, does P control S? If they are going to vote over something, is P going to have the controlling vote? And the answer is no. If Mr. A and Mrs. B stands together, they together have 60% of the votes. So therefore they can outvote P in any decision. So P can never exercise control over S, whilst Mr. A and Mrs. B can stand together and oppose whatever P is suggesting S has to do. So therefore P doesn't control S, because if Mr. A and Mrs. B collides in a decision, then P cannot win that vote. So therefore, this is not a group company and S is not a subsidiary of P. Then we have a more complex group where P actually owns 60% of S1 and it owns 60% of S2. S1 holds 30% of the shares in S3 and S2 also holds 30% of the shares in S3. Now what happens in this instance? Well, P clearly controls S1 and P clearly controls S2. So through its shareholding in S, the question is, will they control S3 as well? Well, P is going to exercise control over S1 and is going to tell S1 what to do. And the same will apply to S2. He's going to exercise control over S2 and he's going to tell S2 what to do. S1 and S2 together are holding 60% of S3. So if P can dictate to S1 what to do and P can dictate to S2 what to do, S1 and S2 has to do what P has actually told him to do, so therefore S3 is also controlled by P. So in effect, P is also the parent company of S3. S1, S2 and S3, we call them fellow subsidiary companies of P. So all of them are actually subsidiary companies of P. Now guys, I want you to have a look at this video, YouTube video. So pause the video here, this one, and go back to the YouTube video. You only need to watch the first 8 minutes of the video. Thereafter, it becomes a little bit more complicated and you do not have to know the complicated stuff. But for sure, the first 8 minutes of the video is excellent background information, and that is knowledge that you should have. So go and watch that and then you come back to this video. Good. We say that the complex group is P, who have subsidiary companies. He exercises control over S1, S2 and S3. So therefore they are all subsidiary companies of P. And then it exercises together with S1 control over SSA. Now in a scenario like that, it means that SSA is effectively controlled by P either directly and via P's shareholding or control in S1. So therefore SSA will also become part of this group of companies. So therefore we're going to add the SSA and we're going to consolidate them into the financial results of the group of P. Now guys, if we go back to this slide, for instance, that's the Afrikaans, let's go to the English one. Yes, the English one. This slide, for instance, P has 60% of S1 and P has 60% of S2. That means in effect that somebody else must have the other 40% of the shares in S1 and the other 40% of the shares of S2. S1 has 30% of S3 and S2 has 30% of S2. So together they have 60% of S3. So somebody else must have the remaining shares, and the remaining shares then being the other 40% of S3. So therefore, we must actually decide, what do we call these outside people? We call those outside shareholders the non-controlling interest. So P controls, but he doesn't have all the shares. So there's some other people who are the non-controlling interest shareholders. So what is non-controlling interest? We say the equity in a subsidiary that cannot be directly or indirectly attributed to the parent company is the non-controlling interest. So it is the residual interest in the net assets held by certain other holders. Now, if we look at this one, we say, well, P owns 60% of S. So the non-controlling interest equals 40%. When we are going to consolidate the figures of P and S, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to add the income of S to the income of P. We're going to add the expenses of S to the expenses of P. And then we're going to get a consolidated net income figure. But everything of S does not belong to P. So then we're going to take out as a one line item 40% of the income of S out of the income statement. So what are we going to retain in the income statement? 100% of P's income and expenses plus effectively only 60% of S's, income and expenses. And I'm going to do the same thing in the statement of financial position. When I'm going to say the total assets of the group, the consolidated financial statements will be 100% of P and 100% of S. The liabilities will be 100% of P and 100% of S. But in the equity of the consolidated P, the group statements of P, I'm going to have the non-controlling interest of 40% in S, and I'm going to take that out of the equity figure, which I'm going to consolidate in of S. So in effect, what am I going to retain in my equity figure? I'm only going to retain P's interest, 60% interest in S, because I'm going to show the other 40% as a non-controlling interest. So don't break your head over that now. We are going to do a few calculations and a few exercises, and once we've done the exercises, you will come to know exactly what I mean by these comments. Good, so this was the last video where we actually spoke about the background of group statements, more the theory behind group statements, which you can definitely expect probably in a question. So make sure that you understand the theory, make sure you understand what control is, and make sure that you understand what control is according to IFRS, as well as control according to the Companies Act, and all the other things that follows on that.